So let's get started. So if you guys want to be, I recommend that you be able to run the code on your own computers. I don't recommend that you be able to follow along and type the things that I'm going to show on screen. So this is going to, right now, is the final setup that you're going to, the final trifecta that you're going to need for web development. You're going to need one terminal window to write all your Git commands in. You're going to need one terminal window to run the hot loader in. And you're going to need one terminal window to run your server in. So you're going to want to have 3 terminal windows open. Whether that's 3 Git bash windows, whether that's 3 tabs of an Apple terminal, whether that's 3 panes of a tmap session, it doesn't matter. You want access to 3 terminals at once. Also, I want you guys to go to the Callback React folder, make sure that you run git pull. And I also want you guys, if you have any code there, to make sure you reset. So if you guys remember, the command is git reset --arg. If you guys have any So I'm going to give you guys 1 minute to get this set up. Who's still working? Raise your hand. All right, I'll give you 30 more seconds. All right. So I'm going to show you what this looks like on my own computer. So what I have is I have my code in one pane over here, or it's in one desktop window. And over here I have 3 terminal windows open. Mine might look a little bit fancy because I have all 3 at once on one thing. Don't really worry about that. All that I have is 3 terminal windows open at the same time, such that I can run commands in one, I can run commands in all 3. And basically what this is going to allow me to do is I'm going to run my hot loader in one of these, I'm going to run my server in another one, and I'm going to do my Git commands in a third one. So that is what my setup looks like. And so after this point, we have our environment set up. Make sure you guys are on the correct branch. And now, what I want to do is let's get this stuff started up. So if you guys want to follow along, I'll just show you what I'm doing right now. So over here, I'm at Workshop 3 Starter. And in one of these windows, I'm going to say npm run hot loader. And the hot loader is going to run. In another one of these, I'm going to say npm start. So npm start is how you run your node server. This is how you, npm run hot loader runs your hot loader. npm start starts your node server. I'm going to start using this term. Node server is the backend server that you guys will be using. If you're using Callback React that you've used before, you do not need npm install. But if you just reclone the repository, you will need to npm install again. All right, so let's see what we've done. If you guys look over here, this is my server right now that I've npm started. And it can say, all right, it's run node on server.js, which is, I'll go over it in a second. And it's saying that there's a server running on Core 3000. Great. seems like we have some code that's been running continuously. Let's see what this code looks like. This code is hella simple right now. The first thing that it's doing is, you might guys see this require keyword. Require in Node is how you import. So as I said, we're going to be using Express. So the first line that we do is we import Express. Then we use a function that Express provides to us, which creates our foundational application. And we tell it that it's going to listen to port 3000. So right now, our server is kind of crappy. It runs on port 3000, but it has nothing that we can do with it. We can't access it at all. It's just running on port 3000. So let's make it do something. So what I want you guys to do is, let's type git checkout workshop 3 - step 1. By the way, if these commands are not working for you, this is the time when you raise your hands and staff will get to you. But I'm not going to stay working on this stuff if you guys are having difficulties. So, can you raise your hands if this is not working? If this is working for you guys? Alright, for most of you it is. Alright, so let's go over what this code does. So, if you guys look in server.server.js, there's 3 new lines in here. And I'm not going to encourage that you guys, again, if you checked out to step 1, you're going to have this code yourselves. But what it's doing is, we've now defined ourselves an endpoint. This is the first bit of an API that we've made now. And what we're saying is, if you make a GET request, this is what app.get does, to this endpoint /API/test, then what we're going to do is we're going to send back a message saying, this one says I made my first API. I think the one on step 1 says something a little bit differently. I'll go over what this rec and res is a little bit, and Kai will go over it more in his lecture. So, now, let's see what this looks like. If you open up a browser, and you go to localhost 3000 /API/test, great.
Workshop 2 branch still.
So, this is how you guys will access your API. And now, this is something that I'm doing right now, and I don't want to confuse you guys. By default, the way your browser works is whenever you navigate to a URL, your browser, and you click enter, your browser will send a GET request to that URL. That's just how your browser works. And so, when I type this endpoint, because remember, the server is running on my own computer. So to talk to it, I go to localhost. If we go to our terminal, the server is running on port 3000. So we're going to go to localhost 3000, and then we want to go to the endpoint that we define, which is /API/test. So that is how we define an endpoint. So, great. We've made our first API endpoint. Does anyone have any questions about how we access this endpoint? Raise your hand if you guys are following along at this point. Awesome. So, we've made our first API endpoint. I want to talk a little bit about this rec and res object. basically a function. So the way that express works is, do you guys remember what I mentioned callback functions earlier? Well, they're going to come back again. Because the way that express works is, if you define an endpoint, so I made an endpoint at API test, the next thing I pass in is a function that I want to run anytime that this endpoint is hit by a client. And express is going to give me access to two things. It's going to give me access to the request, which is in rec. And it's going to give me access to the ability to respond, which is in res. So if you ever see rec, it's something to do with the request. If you ever see the res, that's something to do with the response. So this is a very simple endpoint. It just says res.send, and it sends some data over here. That's all that this endpoint is doing. It's very simple. Any questions? Great, let's move on. So, as you can see, if you go to localhost 3000/API/test, it'll load up whatever endpoint you created. Now, let's check out the step 2. So I'm going to do this myself. If you guys wrote code yourselves, I recommend that you do git reset -- hard. If you're just following along and not typing anything, you just can git check out the step 2. So let's look at our code right now. So this step 2 has just added these 15 lines. And I don't really want to bog down what these lines are doing, especially what is going on, to heavy level of detail. But what we're going to want in any server that we create is the ability to tell the client that something went wrong. And so we're going to add something called error handling to this basic server that we've created. And if you guys want to see what this looks like, well, this is the one point in which I will write a little bit of code. You can type throw error, and you can type in like, this is bad. And now, if you go to your browser, and you try reloading, you see that now it doesn't even tell. If you try going to this endpoint that we've made, we don't even get test API get endpoint. But what happens is that the server has a problem, it has an error, and now it will go to this code over here and basically tell the client that there was an error. And this is useful if we ever want to tell the client that they're doing something bad. We want to make sure that we're responding with an error. And if you can see over here, when we tried making this request, even our browser is trying to help us. They say that the server told us that there was some request that we made that got back to us with an error. So this is also why it's helpful to be able to have these error messages in the server, so that even the browser will know that something went wrong. All right. Now this is the one important thing that I want to go over is coming up. This step is a little bit minor, but this step is it's important, and I want to talk about some things about it. So, serving React files. So, as I said, no server is good unless it can give you back the HTML files for the website. So we want to be able to give back the React files that we wrote earlier when someone asks for them in our server. So, I'm going to walk over this code with you, but I also will explain to you how we're going to get access to this information. So, first, if you guys remember, let's just run npx webpack and see what it does. So first, let's go to step 3. First, I'm going to get reset --hard to get rid of my changes. I'm going to get check out workshop 3, step 3. And now, from here, I'm going to run npx webpack. Okay, great. And what does npx webpack do again? Well, if I look in my basically the folders, there's going to be something under client called dist. And there's going to be an index.html and a bundle.js file. So remember, React boils down to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript at the end. So Webpack, all it does is it takes your complicated files that you've made and converts them to basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And those files are located in index.html and in bundle.js. So we want to make sure that whenever somebody asks for a website, we give them back index.html and bundle.js. So what does that look like in code? It looks like this. If somebody, basically, we need help to make this easier for us, we're going to import another module. This module that we're going to import is called path. And what path does is it tells you, well, where our React code is the directory in which we call this server from. And if you remember, it's in the folder called server. We now want to step back one folder, .. We then want to go into client, and then we want to go into distribution. So this is basically telling us where all our React code is. And then we want to tell Express that we want to remember that. And so this is what this is doing. And furthermore, what we want to do is any request that's made to our server. So if we make any request that is not captured by our API endpoint, we want to respond back with the HTML file. And you can imagine that, well, why isn't it just this? Why isn't it just the root, basically facebook.com/ or localhost and just the base URL? Why do we not just want this? Well, if you guys remember from Matt's lecture, React is kind of smart. If you have different things in the URL, it's going to show different components. So we want to make sure our server, no matter what endpoint that you type in, if this is not an API endpoint, that we're just giving back the React code and letting React handle all the, basically, routing, which is something that Kai's going to talk about. So now let's go look at our web page. So just a reminder, make sure that you've typed npx webpack. And now let's go to localhost 3000. Great. Now we can see our web page that we've loaded. And even still, we could go to like localhost, we could go to profile. And remember now, this is now why the star endpoint is helpful. Is because even though we're now going to a different endpoint, because this is not an API endpoint, our server will give us back index.html, and React will know that, oh, you put profile in the URL, I'm going to show you this different page. So let's go back here. And now, you guys are going to notice something. There's no stories. That's kind of shitty. There's no comments either. That's also bad. Because, two things. One, we haven't implemented the API. That's kind of bad. Two, that API is now talking to your own computer. So before, you guys were accessing a shared API that was all connected to your own computer and connecting to a computer on the internet. But now what we're doing is you're talking to your own computer. So your own computer is now holding this data. And so of course you're not even going to have stories even after you implement the API correctly. And so I want to go over some points first. Right here, this is important. This is something about express and node. The order in which you define your endpoints matters. If you make this endpoint here on the left, you need to go from the most specific endpoint possible to the least specific. So right now, what this does is this makes an endpoint for API test. And it's going to respond back to you saying, you've hit endpoint A. Now, if you make a second endpoint that's API star, well, that's going to get API hello, API Aaron, API web lab. That's all going to respond with endpoint B. But if you do it in the other order around, if you go to API test, you're going to hit endpoint B. Because node operates top down. It will go line by line from the top to the bottom of your file and run those things as configuration. And so if you've determined something that has API star, that's gonna, the second that whenever you type in a request at an endpoint, it's just gonna run down all the rules that you've defined. And the second it finds a match, it's gonna run that code. So imagine now we're running down, if we go to API test, and express is now going through the endpoints you've defined. Well, if you do API hello, it's going to check API test. And it's going to see, oh, there's no match there. Let's go down to the next endpoint. Oh, API star, API hello does go in there, and so let's run that code. But now if you go to the next one and you do API test, well, that's going to match with API star. And so you're just going to always return endpoint B. And so if you guys want to see this yourselves, if you take this API, if you take this bunch of code right here, actually the easier one, is if you take this endpoint for API test, and you paste it below here. Now, if you try loading your web page, so remember, what I'm doing is I'm taking this API test, and I'm putting it below this API get star. And if you open up your web page, and you go to localhost 3000/API/test, you're going to load up your React page now. You're no longer hitting your API endpoint anymore. And that's because what's happening is that your server is finding a match with this endpoint first, because it's less specific. So you need to do your most specific endpoint first, and then your less specific endpoint. And now you're going to get your API again. And now there's two last things before I'm going to let you guys out for lunch. This is confusing. And so if you guys are confused by this, this is why I put it at the end, and why I don't want you guys to be, this is not really related to actual server stuff, but it's something that you guys are going to have to worry about. Little known secret, you guys have been running a server for the first 3 days of this class. The hot loader is actually a server that is taking the React code that you've run, and it's always running npx webpack on it. And it's anytime you make a change, it's automatically updating this bundle.js file that you've created. And so it means that anytime you make a change to your front-end code, you don't need to rerun npx webpack. So it saves you a lot of time. So what I showed you guys was you manually how to get your HTML page from your server directly. And as you guys remember, I told you you have to run npx webpack. And so in the future, whenever you guys are using your website, you should be connecting to localhost 5000, not localhost 3000. Localhost 3000 will talk directly to your server. Localhost 5000 will talk to your hot loader. And I'm going to give you guys a little bit more explanation on this. So, if you guys go to localhost 5000, you'll get your server. And this is how, if you now make a change to your HTML code, this will show up live. So say that we don't like it to say no stories. So we go back here and say no stories. Where did we say that? Oh, it's okay, it's over here. Say no stories for you. And now, this will automatically update live for you if you go to localhost 5000. But now, let's go to localhost 3000. What does it have to tell us? No stories. Because it hasn't rerun npx webpack, your node server does not know that you've changed your front-end code. But your hot loader does. And so your hot loader will be what you want to use when you're building your server. And so if you guys are ever running your own websites and you see, I've made some changes, but it doesn't look like I can see those changes, look at the URL. Make sure that you're connecting to 5000, not to 3000. And what's actually really nice is you can even access your API from your hot loader. And the reason why this works is this will be us, the client. This is the hot loader. And this is your node server. So whenever you send a request, it's going to go to your hot loader. And your hot loader is now going to look at the request that you sent. And if you've specified somewhere that you want this request to go to your node server, which you want to do for any API endpoint, your hot loader is going to pass it along to your node server. And then it's going to, when the node server gets back to the hot loader is going to tell you. So your hot loader actually is a middleman between you and your node server. And it also will check, will say that you want to access your HTML. So this is going to be API/test. Say that you make a request for, I don't know, /profile. Your hot loader knows that /profile is some React code that you want. And so it's immediately just going to get back to you with the updated bundle.js and index.html file that have the updated code. And so, if this doesn't make sense to you guys, don't worry about it. All that you need to know is you need to use localhost 5000 when you're working on this future workshops and on your own website. But just so you guys aren't confused, the hot loader is what's running on port 5000, and your node server is running on 3000. And if you guys wonder, well, where do you tell it you want to pass the API to the node server, I'm just going to show you where, and if you guys are interested, you can look at it yourself. But if you guys see, there's something down here called a webpack.config.js. This is where you define the configurations for Webpack files. And if you scroll all the way down, you've specified that if you go to /API, you want it to communicate to localhost 3000. And so your Webpack server knows, the hot loader server knows that if you ever send something to API, you just want it to send it down to the node server, and it's going to tell you back the response. Otherwise, it's just going to respond to you with the HTML files. So if that bit doesn't make sense to you, don't worry about it. This was basically the end of the lecture. And there's one last thing that I guys wanted to show you that's rather simple, but you probably won't have to worry about it. But if you see it, I want to show you what it means. So let's just check out to complete. git reset hard, and check that to complete. Oh, workshop to complete. Let's go to workshop 3-complete. If you look at the server.js file, I've added one line of code. I've added this line of code. Technically a comment, but I'm using this thing called app.use, and I pass in something called express.json. Don't really worry about what it's doing, but I want to show you what this app.use kind of means. So, the last thing I want to talk to you is if you ever hear the word middleware, don't be worried. It's very simple. Basically, this Express server, the second it runs your request, say that over here is your code. Your actual code for the API. So like res.send, This actual code is what you have. So what middleware is when you receive a request, it might do some processing on the request. Maybe it will do some things to it, do some things to it, and then it's going to send it to you, run your code on it. And then it will go back to the user. So these steps in the middle that do some processing on the request, that's just called middleware. And basically, all it is you can define some rules for Express to run on a request in between it coming to your server and running your own code. And so, we're going to want to use post requests in the next workshop to update our code. And currently, Express doesn't know how to deal with post requests. And so you need to pass in this express.json middleware to allow it to be able to handle post requests. So basically, that is the last step, and it's just needed configuration for you guys to be able to do the next workshop. What's up?
What's the difference between app.use here and for the error checking?
So app.use and the error checking is actually, that's just middleware that we've defined ourselves.
Okay, but how does it know which middleware to?
How does it know which middleware to run?
Yeah.
So it's also top-down. So basically, you know how we did the app.use for the error at the very bottom? Mm-hmm. So that's the last step, the last thing that's run. And it's even below our endpoint handling code. So if our endpoint kind of fails, it's going to run to the middleware step that we have defined below it. So basically, middleware is run linearly by how you defined it in your server.js file. So the way that you register middleware is whenever you see app.use. And the order in which it's run is top-down. Alrighty guys, sorry that there's no time for questions on this part, but I hope you guys got a brief introduction to what a server is. I love this stuff. If you have any questions, find me in person, ask on Piazza, Facebook, whatever. So I'm happy to help. And we're all happy to help as well.
We've got potbelly sandwiches today. Have your